behind him. Hugh Siegel was Chief of Staff to Ontario Conservative Premier Bill Davis and later to Canadian Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. He was a candidate for the leadership of Canada's Progressive Conservatives in 1998. He was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2005 and was chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and special envoy to the Commonwealth. He became the principal of Massey College in 2014 and is a distinguished fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute in Calgary. Also a member of the Trilateral Commission, and hopefully we will see him soon. The first question, Julian and Tom, is about partisanship in politics. The question, how do we get past hyper-partisanship and find ways to work across party lines?
I don't think that history is predictive, but I think history is instructive. I remember when I was growing up, one of the great figures in the Conservative Party was a chap by the name of Dalton Camp. And he was a president of the party, and he had a campaign for the democratization of the party. He'd run for Parliament as a Conservative. But when Prime Minister Mulroney was Prime Minister, he made Mr. Camp a senior policy advisor in the Privy Council office. And one of his focuses was the environmental issue with respect to the old growth in Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia. And Tom McMillan was the Minister of the Environment, and he was from Prince Edward Island. And Dalton was working in the Privy Council office. And Dalton hired a young woman by the name of Elizabeth May, who was a Nova Scotian back then. And they together worked on dealing with that issue and made substantial progress. So party affiliation had nothing to do with getting the job done. People of quality, people with certain skills and backgrounds, people who had a certain sensitivity and capacity to address the issue directly were what was essential. And I think we can see where we are now on climate change, where we are in terms of that ever-growing danger, which is getting closer and closer. The public has a genuine desire to see people work across party lines. Well, that is one good thing, but we need to have the kind of people who will make a difference, who have the mix of skills and experience and background that is beyond party affiliation and absolutely essential to getting the job done. Part of why I'm so delighted to endorse you for the seat you're seeking in the provincial legislature, and why I think it's important that on climate change and other issues, we have the capacity to set party affiliation aside, to work together for good people who will make a real difference.
Well, thank you again for the kind words. One of the things that troubles me, though, is, again, how do we actually make this happen? I know that before I joined the Green Party, I facilitated a meeting between the NDP, the Liberals, and the Greens to see if they could cooperate together to fight some of the destruction of the current government. And there was one joint press conference protesting one of the destructive omnibus bills, and then the party leaders wouldn't allow it anymore. So not Mike Schreiner, of course, but the others. So the question is to how, given that the current political system is such a winner takes all system, it's hard to see party leaders allowing the individual work across party lines that you each have described so eloquently. Hugh?
I would argue that part of what gets anybody elected in a constituency that has been traditionally in the hands of another political party is the nature of the question that that candidate asks. And I think it's completely legitimate in the well-educated and economically pretty robust constituency in which you're seeking office to ask the following question. Are the risks associated with climate change, are the risks associated with what happens if we do not make progress on that more important than the way you have voted traditionally in the past? Is it so important to vote the way you have in the past that doing so without regard to actually getting something done on climate change, reducing our emissions, producing a sustainable long-term future for your children and grandchildren is really not as important as how you voted in the past? think part of the process is how the question is put. And I think your capacity to do that because of your own skill set, because of the reputation you bring to the battle as a candidate, is actually more important, frankly, than your affiliation with the Green Party. Truth of the matter is, any of the parties in that constituency would have been more than delighted to have you as their candidate. Well, why would that be? Well, that's because of what you bring to the important process of moving our government forward, our province forward on the climate change issue in a timely way, so that we do not see what happens if we don't do it properly. So I think you have a certain opportunity to do that, and it takes a capacity to put the question in a pretty direct, blunt, and I would say focused way, so that you don't let the folks who would rather say, well, I've always voted conservative, always voted liberal, hide behind that, because that's not good enough anymore. Whenever we have been through really serious challenges, I think of the world wars and all the rest, we've had unity governments, we've had coalition governments. Why would that be? Because that is the only way to make progress. And the sort of candidacy and I would think contribution you can make is of such a substantial higher nature than that being offered by the other political parties in your constituency. On this issue, you have the capacity to put that question. And the more effectively your campaign does that, the more people who have been comfortable voting the other way without thinking about it are going to think carefully. And in your constituency, when people think carefully, they're going to vote for Dianne Saxe.
Thank you, Hugh. We've got one last question, this part of the panel, and I'm going to ask each of you just to be brief in 1 minute of talking about younger voters. We know that, I mean, this is University-Rosedale. There's a lot of university students. There's a lot of young people just out of university in the riding, and they have tended not to vote at high levels. And yet it's their future that's being decided on by, everything that we do today. So what's your message to young voters as to why they should bother to vote? What should give them hope? What kind of change can they realistically demand?
I would argue, if I may, Dianne, that in the event people of your capacity and skill are not elected, and we have a parliament made up of people with no particular affinity on this issue, no skill set, no capacity, no one's going to pay a higher price for a longer period of time than those very young people who we need to have show up and vote. And I think you're in a position, and I think your party is in a position to ask the question in your constituency to the many students who live there, do you really think not dealing with climate change or just putting it on a list of other issues, as the other parties tend to do, is going to serve your long-term interest as a citizen, as a potential parent, as a participant in our economy, in our culture, in our society? Or do you think it's time to actually make a difference and vote for someone who can be part of that solution? I think the question has to be put, if I may say so, quite bluntly. And the more bluntly that question is put, the more I think bright young people, and I recall my time at Massey College working with them, they will be not in any way constrained by the old political parties or their biases. They'll be looking for a new solution. And in this context, in this riding, in this election, the definition of new solution is Dianne Saxe. And I think you have to be straightforward and focused about that, as should your campaign.
All right, well, we'll do our best. Julian from Gretzky, good point. Tom.
There's another quote from Wayne Gretzky, now that Julian has mentioned the hockey reference. He always said, you don't skate where the puck is, you skate to where it's going to be. And in terms of climate change, it's going to be with people like yourself who actually have solutions and have the intellectual capacity and the leadership to make a real difference. And I think young people will respond to that.
Thank you. Tom?
Hugh, if I could call on you to tell us, why are you supporting Dianne? And in your opinion, what do we need to do to get people to follow your lead to support Dianne?
Lima, I have only one word that sums up in total why I'm supporting Dianne and think it's really important that she be elected to the legislature. and that word is courage. You know, what we have seen around the climate change issue, however it's been discussed and however there have been sort of trends in favor of embracing the issue more directly from time to time, the bottom line is that the vast majority of players in the political process are always glad to sideline it because for them there's some other issue which is more important on a temporary basis. I saw the reports she wrote when she was commissioner. They were science-based, evidence-based, and if that report produced a result that was critical of the government of the day, she didn't care. She let the science and the evidence of that report be in the public domain, which is probably why the Ford administration was quick to let her go, frankly. And you know, any administration that thinks in our present circumstance, building more highways, reducing the cost of gas, reducing the tax on energy is a way to make progress on climate change is completely disconnected from any semblance of reality. So I asked myself, who is going to have the courage in the Parliament of Ontario to stand up every day and confront the government of the day, if it's not a green government, which it's unlikely to be, with the realities that have to be addressed? And I come up with one person, and that is Dianne Saxe. And remember this, governments get elected in majorities, and then they have an election a little bit later, and they don't come back with majorities, they come back with minorities. And then every single vote in the legislature is essential for the way that parliament works. And I think there's a very real chance that this coming election will not see any party get a majority. It'll be a minority parliament. And then the individual voices of every MPP will matter. And we need Dianne Saxe's voice because of her courage, because we're not going to get over the hump of people avoiding the issue of climate change unless someone with integrity, background, evidence-based, and a scientific ability and courage confronts the system. And that is what Dianne is in a unique position to do.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was a wonderful little video too. Thank you, Salima, for hosting that section, as well as for all of your kind words. Julian, Tom, Hugh, those were lovely sentiments and very strong endorsements that I know Dianne truly appreciates. We have a few moments for some question and answer for the panelists. And I don't think I will direct the question to specific panelists. I'll ask you to jump in, whoever feels like they'd like to answer these questions. And I've collected some from the Q&A, and I've tried to write some down from the chat as well. One of the earlier questions that we got, and this is from Tony Key, is that several commentators have suggested that the only way to tackle climate issues and perhaps others is to establish a war cabinet similar to the one in Canada and the UK during World War II.
Well, Brian, if the question is, do we think it's possible that the nature of the climate challenge and the looming disaster is such that political parties would have to work together as one would in the case of an emergency, I think it's completely rational to suggest that that's true and that is real. And it's a genuine proposition that may emerge if governments do not do what they need to do collectively and responsibly on climate change. Then the question is, if that happens, who do you want to be part of that larger grouping who happens to be a member of the Green Party whose commitment on the issue of the environment is unassailable? And the answer is, if you can have someone like Dianne Saxe in that mix, then the quality of those discussions will be better. The acuity of the decisions made will be more relevant to the decisions that have to be taken and the solutions that have to be implemented. So I don't, we can't know exactly how that would come together, but in the past, there was no pattern by how it came together, in terms of how it came together. But when there were circumstances that were so dire, politicians of different parties realized that that was the only way to proceed. And I think we have to assume that there is a genuine chance of that happening, and who would you want to have in the mix in that context, and that produces the answer of Dianne Saxe.
Is how do we get people, and I think the question referred to voters, to prioritize longer term challenges such as climate change, as opposed to the focus we often see on short term issues and concerns?
Well, I'm not going to add much to what Tom said, but I would say this. When you do detailed research on voter opinions, they will have strong views on issues. They will have strong views on what's important to them. But the only way those views matter on election day is if they are in fact salient. In other words, they actually become a determinant of their vote itself. And I would argue that one of the core questions that has to be addressed in this campaign is, of all the issues being talked about, what is likely to be most salient in your life, in your children's life, in your grandchildren's life, sooner than we care to admit? And I think there'd be a huge consensus that that is actually climate change. And if that's the consensus, the challenge is to translate that consensus into the one thing they can do on election day or in the advance polls to really make a difference on that front. And that one thing is to vote for Dianne Saxe. There's nothing else they can do in that constituency between now and election day that would make a difference to the extent that voting for Dianne Saxe would. So if you boil down the question to the one thing that is actually doable, you come up with the answer that we're all here tonight to endorse and advance.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Hugh and Tom and Julian, Salima and Brian. Thank you for helping make this a wonderful evening. I've cried a couple of times. I appreciate everybody's good wishes. Anybody who likes what I stand for, likes what we stand for, you got to help make it happen. Website is votefordianne.ca. All the information is there. Thank you, thank you, thank you.